Thank you so much for all the support you gave me, guys.
Okay.
Today, I got promoted.
Those who spread goodness radiate happiness to everyone around them. Introducing LOLC Finance Credit Cards. Fuel the goodness in you.
Welcome to LMDtv. This week on Talking Business, Anushan Selvarajah speaks with entrepreneur and high net worth investor Insaaf Mohideen on the country's investment climate.
Welcome to LMDtv, Insaaf. Good to have you with us.
Thanks for having me.
So how has your visit to Colombo been? You came under this the so-called investor bubble. In terms of the protocols and all, how was your experience?
For the most part, I think it went fairly seamlessly in terms of, getting the approvals ahead of time, and then pretty much, PCR standard protocols coming in, but certainly a lot more protocol imposed than most other countries that you would go into at this juncture. For instance, coming in, I stopped by Dubai, which has opened up an economy. I come from California, been to Norway, and a lot of other places in the past month even that I've traveled. So I kind of feel like, there's a sense of fear that's unfounded once you get into Sri Lanka, right? So getting through the airport, getting the approval process, definitely a little bit more intimidating to consider coming into Sri Lanka.
Now, you've been watching Sri Lanka for a number of years. What have you learned, and what are your conclusions about Sri Lanka's capital markets?
In general, the capital markets, when you look at it overall, there's a sense of fear right now. The biggest issue is, are we going to default or not? My sense, having talked to everyone, definitely no fear of that. I don't think the existing government, existing leadership will take that reputational risk. And certainly they do have access to emergency funds to be able to cover it. And so far it seems like it's a planned exercise to bridge that gap, that deficit, as well as bring the currency inflation factors under control. So a lot more emphasis on bringing in meaningful FDI, value-added FDI, and also emphasis on local enterprise and entrepreneurship.
Now, Insaaf, there is skepticism when it comes to our stock market. People say that it's just the domain of the wealthy and therefore isn't really a barometer of investor confidence. What would you say to that?
Yes and no. So there are multiple factors, just like in the US, and most markets have done well. So it's not a new phenomenon in the past year. We all expected gloom and doom, but what's happened is, the retail segment's done well. Consumer confidence has stayed relatively well, high, primarily because of the stimulus packages, etc. I think some of that's translated into Sri Lanka because now we have a stable government, not only, presidential, but also post-parliamentary, policies, leadership, and generally, I think there's an inducement of confidence by having the stability itself. And then you take, for instance, we just don't have the ability to basically import anymore. So that restriction creates a plethora of rupees sitting, right? So now you don't have the ability to have that exchange. So, what do? Either you deal with inflationary measures or you start investing in the market. So I think some of that's driving that. But typically this market is also known for being dominated by some larger players. So wealth distribution, I think in most instances, when you create wealth through capital markets, it tends to levitate more towards the wealthy, right?
Let's move on to the tech sector. Insaaf, that's what you are most interested in. What are the opportunities here in Sri Lanka?
We certainly have skill sets. We certainly have, a budding sense of entrepreneurship within society, the youth. But I'm not seeing anything that's facilitating that. I'm not seeing anything that's encouraging that. So for instance, I still don't see a tech park. I still don't see us attracting, foreign companies like, Invest Ireland, Invest Norway. These guys actually brought in a lot of tech companies. So that's what I would like to see is, whether it be from a BOI perspective, whether it be from just a national messaging perspective, we should be encouraging both the inflow of tech companies as well as even vocational training, etc., just to be able to encourage us to think big and think global. I'm not seeing that yet.
Insaaf, in the cover story of you done in the LMD magazine, you said that there is massive potential for Sri Lanka to transform itself into a new age service economy. Could you just elaborate on this?
So, I mean, when you think about it historically, if you look at India about 20-25 years ago, they were known for outsourcing. Data entry, back office, etc. Now they basically obviously moved up that food chain, right? Because trying to be a manufacturing giant, I mean, that's an older economy, and you basically think of the scales, you think of the time that it takes, right? But if you basically start providing value-added services, be it technology, be it having a homegrown hedge fund, homegrown investment banking skill sets, all of which we have, there are levels of education and exposure for. That's really the new age services, right? Which is higher margin, middle income generating or high income generating services, and that's where we need to transform towards, and that's where I think a lot more focus needs to come into play in our educational and our training systems and mechanisms, right? So I remember about 3-4 years ago when I even met with the president, one of the things that he had mentioned too was we need to figure out a way of leapfrogging from a high school education into a vocational program. So you're able to basically train individuals hands-on, whether it be in technology, coding, certain levels of trading, investment banking, hotel management, etc., so that we are generating the higher level services skill sets. And I'm not seeing those elements in play yet.
In your view, have there been big changes in the tech industry as a result of the pandemic?
Obviously, under the investor bubble, I've just been very limited in the interaction that I can have. It's been very specific meetings that I've had, etc. So I don't think I've been out there to just observe any socioeconomic patterns. But one of the biggest elements is globally, everyone's basically started going to virtual work models. And that definitely does present an opportunity because we certainly could be the next tech hub, or we certainly could be getting the vocational training or even participate in hackathons, a concept that was in the Silicon Alley, you had these hackathons that you had to be physically present for. Now Sri Lanka certainly can plug in and certainly can benefit from it. But short answer, I haven't made any observations.
Have you assessed the real estate market here in Sri Lanka? Now we've got the port city coming up, plus a few other projects as well. So what have been your conclusions on our real estate sector?
So, there's certainly a lot of developments and opportunities going on. Whether it be the Heritage Square, Port City, obviously a very ambitious project, as well as, UDA's plans for middle income development. I think they all come together really well. Now the key question for us to determine is, are we going to have the right levels of industry and economic growth to support these, right? So if you look at the Port City, for instance, it assumes we are going to create a certain number of jobs, we are going to attract certain industries for that to be viable, all right? Because if all of this built out today, without that congruent economic development, you're going to have overbuild out, right? Just look around here, you have the Ritz coming up, ITC coming up, you have Port City coming up, the heritage developments coming up, and everywhere you go, there is a building or two coming up. The argument can be made, that's probably overdevelopment, but then again, date back 15 years ago when this whole phenomenon of, growing vertically came up, people made that same argument. I think, with urbanization, the factor is we are going to need more and more housing because this will be economic hub. So I'm fairly excited that it's planned in a way, it's providing that entire spectrum. So for the first time, we are now thinking of planned middle and lower income housing, which becomes a problem as the economy grows, right? As we move from that 4,000 to that 8,000 per capita economy. So fairly pleased that it's not just happening in Colombo. I was talking to individuals who are leading the Kampar district, etc. So there's definitely at a district level, there's planned growth. But in Colombo itself, it's very exciting if all of these projects come together, how it'll, the whole city connects into the new city, how there's plans to basically revive and extend nightlife. Those are all elements that you need for robust tourism, robust economies, and to attract new industries.
We're going for a short break now.
Our story is one of reimagining. Reimagining who you can be, what you can achieve, and how SEMA can support you. As technology and digital platforms disrupt businesses, we are reimagining what the profession can be. We've updated our syllabus to meet the expectation of employers, ensuring SEMA-qualified professionals have the skills to make an impact from day one. Reimagine your career. Contact SEMA Sri Lanka.
Welcome back to the show as we continue our discussion with serial entrepreneur and high net worth investor Insaaf Mohideen. Insaaf, now the world is still going through this pandemic. So in terms of investments, do you think that the money will come in at this point in time, or will people just wait and see how the whole pandemic turns out?
Oh, absolutely. I think general expectation is we are going to flatten the curve. We are going to come out of this going into summer, very realistically. Where I come from, we've already seen in California vaccinations taking effect, and a lot of the restrictions are coming down. Emergency room capacity is basically building back up. Where we had zero capacity, now we're basically up to about 22% capacity. So I truly think the pandemics, we are probably seeing the tail end of this pandemic, at least this phase of it. And then globally, what's the phenomenon that's consistent, including Sri Lanka in the past 3-4 weeks? Wealth creation in the markets. So some of that will get deployed because the market's only going to keep going up so much, and then there's going to be the withdrawals, and people are going to be looking for new industries. So a lot of the larger hedge funds, a lot of the larger sovereign funds that I even work with are looking for opportunities. When the markets, the economies, tourism opens up, do we have our game together? Are we able to consistently market ourselves? That's the bigger concern for me, right? So if you want to go after foreign dollars, you want to build a robust BOI, you want to build a robust global industry in tourism, you want to be able to market the country. So that's the one real thing that I'm not seeing yet is, what does Sri Lanka stand for?
In the context of attracting FDI and quality investors, Insaaf, what would be your wish list? What does Sri Lanka have to put in place?
I think that's pretty simple across the board. Got to open up, make it easy for investors, tourists to come back in. My philosophy personally is, when this whole pandemic happened, either I can ruin my income source or I can basically risk my health. I made the decision. I'd rather risk my health and make the travels that actually continue my industries versus destroy it, right? So it's, as a country, you got to also balance that out and figure out, at what point do we open up, make it easy for people to come back in. That's one key element. Dubai's done it. They made a strategic decision. The market's booming there. Tourism's booming there. Apart from that, for investors in general, what has to happen is the message has to be clear. So when you come in as an investor, and as an investor, we all have our profiles, right? So I'm a high risk, high reward investor. So if you basically tell me to buy the local bonds, or if you ask me to go invest in real estate that pays off over 20 years, has zero interest for me, right? Similarly, someone who is looking for an annuity stream or a lower risk profile, they probably would want to see projects that I wouldn't want to see. So I think that's the part that needs to be coordinated, is identify the risk profile of the investor and line it up, right? Anyone who wants to pitch ideas to him or her should pretty much line up and come and boom, boom, boom. So you're not going and looking at things that are irrelevant and going on a roadshow, right? Because this is not about introducing the country. Because if we are coming down to the country, we already know its redeemable attributes, opportunities. That's why we're here. So show us what you think we could benefit from, because that's a much better use of both parties' time. And bureaucracy, right? Make it a lot easier to get it done and get the information you need. I found that it was a little hard for me to get the information that I needed on this trip, primarily because everyone's trying to put together their portfolios, restructured, etc. But that would be my biggest ask, is have everything lined up, right? If you want to invest, if you want to buy, you walk into a store, you tell them I'm a size 9 shoe. They'll ask you, are you looking for a sneaker? Are you looking for a dress shoe? They're showing you what you want to see much easier. We're not quite there.
Insaaf, how important is responsible governance, minimal red tape, and perceptions of corruption in terms of bringing in FDI?
That goes with, that's pretty straightforward, right? I mean, it's akin to me asking the question, how important is air, right?
To meet the needs of the ICT industry, Insaaf, the English language is a must. Where do you think Sri Lanka stands in terms of its language skills?
I think in terms of not even ICT, if you want to be a global player, whether it be in the entertainment industry, you want to run the top levels of, hotels, or any other industry, for instance, right? Even at the airport, when you walk in, you got to have English skills. I mean, a lot of we have similar attributes to China in that, not quite so bad, but most Sri Lankans can read English pretty well. But spoken English, there's definitely a gap when it comes to government services and whatnot, right? I found myself having to switch to Sinhalese in a lot of my meetings to get my points across. In advantage, I had all of my Sinhalese is pretty mediocre, but I was still able to get by. So that's where I would also imagine that, overall shoring up our skills in terms of spoken English, right? Because for the most part, I'd argue that's more important than being able to read, because you can always get someone to translate it for you, go to Google, get it translated. But the ability to conduct conversation and basically make someone feel at home or basically be able to negotiate, that's key.
What must be done, would you say, to bridge the gaps that are there, especially amongst our youth?
I mean, I think it's not something you can change overnight, but definitely exposure, right? So if you're in Sri Lanka, if you're in Colombo, you obviously have a lot more exposure, and you're able to communicate and keep a conversation. But you basically get even an hour away from Colombo, that gap's much wider. So at that point, I would imagine vocational training, right? People go in, as with any language, immersion training is the best way. So how do you get that immersion training to the masses is something that we have to systematically determine. I'm not an education expert, but this is just an observation I had from just trying to get business done here and get around.
As a final question then, Insaaf, what is your outlook for the global investment climate over the rest of the year?
I think global investment climate is probably going to continue to boom because there's a lot of pent-up demand. Through all of this, it's proven that there was a lot of monetary easing, a lot of stimulus packages that's going to continue to drive it. But probably in the next year or so, you're most likely going to have somewhat of an adjustment off of some of these bubbles, right? So we may not have a full-blown correction, but we will definitely have somewhat of a correction, consolidation to kind of understand, okay, how much of this was actually driven by the pandemic behaviors in retail and consumer, etc. But I don't think it's a gloom and doom, and when you do make an investment, it has to be multi-cycle. No one's ever basically gotten rich playing the markets, right? People get rich by investing in the market.
Well, that's all the time we have. Thank you very much for joining us on the show, Insaaf. It was a great pleasure talking to you, and good luck on your travels.
Awesome, thanks for having me.
After a short break, Ashwini Vethakan will bring you an update on Sri Lanka's export and manufacturing sector. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to the show. I'm Ashwini Vethakan, and now let's take a look at the island's exports and manufacturing report. According to the Sri Lanka Export Development Board, the $13.5 billion export target set for merchandise exports in early 2020 remains challenging, requiring not only strong efforts from local enterprises, but also the recovery of global demand against the backdrop of a complicated COVID-19 situation. Amid the severe impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic, Sri Lanka's merchandise exports earning amounted to $9.9 billion last year, exceeding the revised forecast of $9.5 billion. According to the EDB chairman, a notable rebound of the export sector was recorded in mid-2020 despite the COVID-19 outbreak due to proactive measures introduced by the government. The growth in exports was not only the result of the effective prevention and control of the pandemic in Sri Lanka, but also the commitment of the exporter community in supporting the economy by earning much needed foreign currency. According to Sri Lanka Customs data, export earnings in December 2020 registered $931.7 million, recording an increase of almost 14% from November 2020 and a decline of nearly 7% from December 2019. Reductions were recorded in October and November due to the COVID-19 outbreak, which directly impacted the country's manufacturing and export facilities. Furthermore, adverse global market conditions for Sri Lanka's key exports were aggravated by the second wave of the pandemic, experienced by many countries, leading to low demand. As for the country's top 10 export markets, apart from the US, the UK and Germany, increase in exports were recorded in other markets. Exports to China and Turkey increased by more than 30% in December compared to the corresponding period of the previous year. Meanwhile, Sri Lanka's Manufacturing Purchasing Managers Index increased to 61.2 in December, rising by 3.6 index points from November. This marks a new high since July, as the index benefited from normalizing economic activity. The significant improvement in production, 60.1 index points in December from 52.2 in the previous month, largely stemmed from the manufacture of food and beverages and had a strong influence on the overall index. The accumulation of stocks in anticipation of supply chain disruptions ahead of the Chinese New Year holidays contributed to hikes in the new orders, with 63.5% in December versus 61.8% in November. A stock of purchases with 55.6 index points from 47.2 sub-indices, with the latter reversing a downward trend. The employment sub-index also rebounded from 48.9 index points to 55.1, while suppliers' delivery time suffered from delays at the port of Colombo, falling to 75.3 from 77. And that's all we have for you this week. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Thank you for watching and stay safe.